My teacher butchered our names daily but had a meltdown when we mispronounced Kowalczyk after we started calling her Mrs. Kowalczyk on purpose. She failed everyone who participated until we discovered she'd been systematically giving lower grades to students with non-Anglo names for 15 years and got her teaching license revoked. I'm a junior at Lincoln High, and I have a teacher named Mrs. D. Kowalczyk who acts like she's running Harvard instead of a public school classroom. Complex name, right? Kowalczyk. Polish, with all those consonants that trip people up. She makes a huge deal whenever anyone mispronounces it, stopping class to correct them with this condescending tone. Meanwhile, she butchers student names daily without a second thought. My name is Xiomara. Yeah, it's Spanish. Xiomara. I get that it looks intimidating at first, but it's not rocket science. Xiomara. I've had her class for 2 months, and she still calls me Zmara or Xmara or whatever random combination pops into her head. I'm not the only one. There's Siobhan who gets called Sioban instead of Shuvan. Nguyen who she pronounces like Nujen instead of Win. Saoirse who becomes Sorcy instead of Saoirse. But God forbid you say Mrs. Kowalczyk instead of Mrs. Kowalczyk. She'll stop mid-lecture to correct you. It's Kowalczyk, she'll say, drawing out each syllable like she's talking to a toddler. Some people just don't take the time to learn proper pronunciation. The irony was suffocating. Working with Mrs. Kowalczyk was like navigating a minefield. Every day started the same way. She'd take attendance, butchering half the names on her roster while students sat there cringing. When she got to mine, I'd feel my shoulders tense up, waiting for whatever creative mispronunciation she'd come up with that day. Zmara Rodriguez, she'd call out, not even looking up from her clipboard. It's Xiomara, I'd correct politely. Here, she'd mark me present without acknowledging the correction. Not sorry or thank you for correcting me. Just mark and move on like my actual name didn't matter. But if a substitute teacher said Mrs. Kowalczyk during morning announcements, she'd march down to the office during her planning period to set the record straight. One Tuesday morning, I'd finally had enough. She'd called me Xomara during attendance, and when I corrected her, she actually rolled her eyes and said, "Some names are just difficult. I don't have time to master every pronunciation." That's when something clicked in my brain. If she doesn't have time to say my name right, then I don't have time to say hers right either. I waited until she called on me to answer a question about the Revolutionary War. I raised my hand and she pointed at me with that laser pointer. "Yes, Mrs. Kowalczyk," I said, pronouncing her name like I was sounding it out for the first time. Her head snapped up from her notes. "It's Kowalczyk." "Right, sorry, Mrs. Kowalczyk," I said, like I was really trying but just couldn't get it. A few students snickered. She gave me a sharp look but continued with the lesson. The next day, when she called on me again, I did it again. "Mrs. Kowalczyk, I think the answer is taxation without representation." "Kowalczyk," she corrected tersely. "Got it, Mrs. Kowalczyk." By the third day, other students started catching on. Siobhan raised her hand and asked, "Mrs. Kowalczyk, can you repeat the question?" Nguyen chimed in with Mrs. Kowalczyk when answering about the Boston Tea Party. Saoirse went with Mrs. Kowalski like she was genuinely confused about the spelling. We got creative with it. Someone used Mrs. Kowalczyk. Another tried Mrs. Kowalczyk. My personal favorite was when Marcus, whose name she pronounced perfectly fine, asked Mrs. Kowalczykowski, "Is this going to be on the test?" By Friday, Mrs. Kowalczyk was visibly twitching every time someone said her name. Her corrections were getting sharper, her voice more strained, but she couldn't really call us out without looking petty, because we were all trying, and some names are just difficult, right? The breaking point came during 5th period on Monday. We were discussing the Constitutional Convention when she called on me again, mispronouncing my name as Zara this time, not even close to any version of Xiomara. "Yes, Mrs. Kowalczyk," I responded, really drawing out the confusion. That's when she snapped. "It's Kowalczyk," she shouted, slamming her hand on the desk. Kowalczyk. How hard is that? It's disrespectful to deliberately mispronounce someone's name. You're doing this on purpose. The classroom went dead silent. 28 pairs of eyes stared at her as the echoes of her outburst faded. I looked at her calmly. "Some names are just difficult, Mrs. Kowalczyk. I don't have time to master every pronunciation." Her face went from red to purple. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, then opened it again. Nothing came out. Siobhan raised her hand. "Mrs. Kowalczyk, are you saying it's disrespectful to mispronounce names on purpose?" "Of course it is," she snapped. "Interesting," Nguyen said quietly, "because you've been calling me Nujen for 2 months, even though I've corrected you multiple times. It's Win. And you call me Sioban," Siobhan added. "It's Shuvan." "My name is Xiomara," I said. Not Zmara, not Xmara, not Zara, Xiomara. The room was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking. Mrs. Kowalczyk looked around at all of us, realizing she'd walked straight into her own trap. That's different," she stammered. "Your names they're from other languages." "So is yours," Marcus pointed out. "Kowalczyk is Polish, right? Should we just call you Mrs. Smith because Polish names are hard?" She stood there for a full 10 seconds, mouth opening and closing like a fish. Finally, she sat down at her desk and picked up her attendance sheet. Xomara. That was when I snapped. My voice cracked on the word snapped, but I kept going. The whole class watched as I stood up from my desk, my hands trembling slightly. Mrs. Kowalczyk's face had gone from purple to white, her knuckles gripping the edge of her desk. I walked to the front of the room, each step deliberate. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Someone's pencil rolled off a desk and clattered to the floor, but nobody moved to pick it up. I stopped directly in front of her desk, maintaining eye contact. Mrs. Kowalczyk stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the linoleum. We faced each other across her desk, the attendance sheet between us like a battle line. Her laser pointer lay forgotten next to her coffee mug. The bell rang, sharp and sudden. Nobody moved. 28 students sat frozen in their seats, backpacks untouched, eyes darting between us. The hallway outside filled with the sounds of students rushing to their next classes, but our classroom remained a bubble of tension. Mrs. Kowalczyk's hand moved toward the attendance sheet. I watched her fingers hover over my name, over the crossed-out attempts at pronunciation she'd scribbled in the margins. Zmara, Xmara, Zara, everything but Xiomara. She picked up her red pen. The cap came off with a small pop that seemed to echo in the silent room. She drew a line through all her previous attempts and wrote in careful letters, C-O-Mah-Ra. Then she looked up at me. Her jaw worked like she was chewing on words she couldn't quite spit out. Finally, she managed a single nod. I turned and walked back to my desk, collected my things, and headed for the door. The other students began to stir, slowly gathering their belongings. As I reached the threshold, I heard Siobhan's chair scrape back. The hallway was nearly empty by the time I emerged. I leaned against the lockers, my heart still racing. Through the classroom door, I could hear the shuffle of students leaving, the zip of backpacks, the quiet murmur of voices. Siobhan came out first, her red hair catching the light. She gave me a small smile and a thumbs up before heading to her next class. Nguyen followed, pausing to bump his fist against mine. One by one, my classmates filed out, each acknowledging what had just happened with a nod, a smile, or a quiet word of support. Mrs. Kowalczyk emerged last. She walked past me without a word, her heels clicking against the floor with less authority than usual. Her shoulders were rigid, her briefcase clutched tightly in her hand. That afternoon, I sat in the cafeteria with my usual lunch group. The story had already spread through the junior class like wildfire. People I'd never spoken to before stopped by our table to share their own stories about Mrs. Kowalczyk mispronouncing their names. My phone buzzed, a text from my mom asking how my day was going. I stared at the screen, unsure how to explain what had happened. How do you tell your mother that you just staged a classroom rebellion over pronunciation? The next morning, I walked into Mrs. Kowalczyk's classroom with a knot in my stomach. She stood at the board, writing out the day's objectives in her neat cursive: Constitutional Convention, Federalist Papers, the usual AP history material. Other students filtered in, the atmosphere noticeably different from our usual morning energy. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen when she took attendance. Mrs. Kowalczyk picked up her clipboard at exactly 8:15, just like always. She cleared her throat and began calling names. When she reached mine, she paused. The entire class leaned forward slightly. Xiomara Rodriguez? She pronounced it perfectly. C-O-Mah-Ra, clear as a bell. Here, I responded, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. She continued down the list. Siobhan O'Brien? Shuvan, perfect. Nguyen Tran? Win, correct. Saoirse Murphy? Searshaw. Not a single mistake. The class exchanged glances. Marcus raised his hand when she finished. Mrs. Kowalczyk, did you practice our names? Her face tightened, but she didn't snap. Instead, she set down the clipboard and folded her hands. I realized yesterday that I had been inconsistent in my expectations. If I demand proper pronunciation of my name, I should extend the same courtesy to my students. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was something. I wonder what Mrs. Kowalczyk spent her evening doing after that showdown. Did she sit at home practicing all those names she'd been butchering for months? There's something curious about how she couldn't even attempt a real apology today. We moved on to the lesson, discussing the debates between Federalists and anti-Federalists. The tension in the room gradually eased, though it never quite returned to normal. Over the next few days, things settled into a new rhythm. Mrs. Kowalczyk pronounced our names correctly. We pronounced hers correctly. It should have been the end of it, but I started noticing things, little things at first. When she returned our essays on the Constitutional Convention, mine came back with more red ink than usual. Comments like unclear thesis and needs stronger evidence peppered the margins. I'd never gotten below a B+ in her class before. This paper, C+. I compared notes with Siobhan after class. Her essay, which she admitted she'd rushed the night before, got a B. Marcus, who'd literally copied half his arguments from Wikipedia, got a B+. But those of us who'd participated in the name pronunciation rebellion, we all saw our grades drop. My mom noticed when I brought home my progress report, a C+ in AP history. Xiomara, what's going on? You love history. I explained about the essay, leaving out the classroom confrontation. She frowned at the paper, reading through Mrs. Kowalczyk's comments. These seem pretty harsh. Have you talked to her about it? The thought of approaching Mrs. Kowalczyk for a one-on-one conversation made my stomach churn. But my mom was right. I needed to address this directly. I stayed after class the next day. Mrs. Kowalczyk sat at her desk, grading papers with sharp, efficient strokes of her red pen. She didn't look up when I approached. Mrs. Kowalczyk, I wanted to discuss my Constitutional Convention essay. She glanced up briefly, then returned to her grading. What about it? I feel like the grade doesn't reflect the quality of my work. I've never received below a B+ in your class, and I put a lot of effort into this essay. Effort doesn't equal quality, Xiomara. She pronounced my name correctly, but her tone was ice cold. Your analysis was superficial, and your arguments lacked sophistication. I placed my essay on her desk, next to Marcus's, which she'd been grading. Even upside down, I could see he'd written John Locke as John Locke throughout his paper. She'd circled it once with SP, but hadn't deducted points. Could you give me specific examples of where my analysis was superficial? She set down her pen with deliberate precision. Are you questioning my professional judgment? I'm trying to understand how to improve. Perhaps if you spent less time orchestrating classroom disruptions and more time on your studies, your work would improve naturally. There it was. The real issue laid bare. This wasn't about my essay quality. This was payback. So this is about what happened with the names? I have no idea what you're talking about. She picked up her pen again. If you have concerns about your grade, you can take it up with the department chair. Otherwise, I have work to do. I left her classroom with my essay clutched in my hand, anger burning in my chest. In the hallway, I nearly collided with Nguyen. Hey, you okay? He noticed my expression. I showed him my essay grade. He winced and pulled out his own paper. C-. She's doing it to all of us. Siobhan got a C too. Everyone who corrected her about our names. This is grade retaliation. Yeah, but how do we prove it? She's careful. The comments look legitimate if you don't know the pattern. He was right. Mrs. Kowalczyk was too smart to make it obvious. She'd found a way to punish us that looked completely professional on the surface. That night, I spread out all my returned assignments from her class on my bedroom floor. Tests, quizzes, essays, homework. I photographed everything, creating a timeline. My grades before the name incident, A's and B+, after, C's and D's. I texted the others from from class, asking them to do the same. By the next morning, we had documented evidence from 8 students showing the same pattern, grades dropping immediately after the confrontation. But documentation was one thing. Getting someone to take it seriously was another. I decided to start with my guidance counselor, Mr. Peterson. He listened patiently as I explained the situation, showing him the grade patterns on my phone. Have you considered that maybe you're not putting in the same effort as before? He suggested. Sometimes when we have conflicts with teachers, it affects our performance. My effort hasn't changed. Look at my grades in other classes. All A's and B's. It's only Mrs. Kowalczyk's class. Personality conflicts happen, Xiomara. Maybe you should focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. I left his office frustrated. He hadn't even looked at the evidence properly, just dismissed it as a personality conflict. Over lunch, our group strategized. Saoirse suggested talking to our parents as a united front. Nguyen thought we should go directly to the principal. Siobhan wanted to document everything for the rest of the semester before taking action. She's being more careful now, Siobhan pointed out. Yesterday she called on me in class, and when I gave the right answer, she actually had to acknowledge it. She's not going to slip up easily. She was right. Mrs. Kowalczyk had adjusted her tactics. She called on us less frequently, but when she did, she couldn't mark us wrong if we gave correct answers. The grade sabotage was subtle, subjective, hidden in essay grades and participation scores where she had more discretion. My parents noticed my stress at dinner. I'd been pushing food around my plate, lost in thought about how to handle the situation. You've been quiet lately, Miha, my dad said. Everything okay at school? I finally told them everything. The name mispronunciations, the confrontation, the grade retaliation. My mom's expression grew increasingly concerned as I showed them the evidence we'd collected. This is serious, she said. A teacher using grades as punishment? That's completely inappropriate. Mr. Peterson thinks it's just a personality conflict. My dad's jaw tightened. Then we go over his head. This is affecting your college applications. We're not letting some petty teacher ruin your future. But even with my parents' support, I knew this wouldn't be easy. Mrs. Kowalczyk had been teaching for 15 years. She was department vice chair. She knew how to work the system. The next few weeks became a careful dance. In class, Mrs. Kowalczyk maintained perfect professionalism. She pronounced our names correctly, called on us occasionally, and taught her lessons with the same efficiency as always. But the grades told a different story. My next essay came back with a D+. The comments were extensive and harsh, lacks critical thinking, superficial understanding of historical context. Writing needs significant improvement. I knew my writing hadn't suddenly deteriorated. My English teacher had just praised my analytical essay on The Great Gatsby. My history research paper for Mr. Chen's elective got an A, but in Mrs. Kowalczyk's class, I apparently couldn't write a coherent paragraph. The stress started affecting other areas of my life. I spent hours revising assignments for her class, trying to make them criticism-proof. My other grades began to slip as I devoted more time to history. I wasn't sleeping well, lying awake, replaying interactions, and planning how to fix this. One afternoon, while studying in the library, I overheard 2 sophomores talking about Mrs. Kowalczyk. She keeps calling me Alexandra when my name is Alejandra, one girl said. I've corrected her like 10 times. Just give up, her friend advised. She called my brother Mitchell instead of Miguel for an entire year. He said it wasn't worth fighting. I realized this had been going on for years. How many students had just accepted the mispronunciations? How many had been too intimidated to speak up? That evening, I created a shared document titled Name Pronunciation Experiences with Mrs. K. I sent the link to a few trusted friends, asking them to share it quietly with anyone who'd had similar experiences. Within 2 days, the document had over 30 entries. Students from different years, different classes, all sharing stories of Mrs. Kowalczyk butchering their names while demanding perfect pronunciation of hers. Some mentioned grade drops after correcting her. Others talked about feeling invisible, their identities erased every morning during attendance. The document became our ammunition, but I knew we needed more than stories. We needed a plan that would force the administration to take notice without giving Mrs. Kowalczyk room to retaliate further. That's when Siobhan had an idea that would change everything. Siobhan's idea came during our study session in the library's back corner. She pulled out her phone and showed us the school district's website, specifically the page about educational equity policies. Her finger traced across the screen as she highlighted specific phrases about cultural sensitivity and fair treatment of all students. I watched her navigate through the policy documents, my mind racing with possibilities. The others leaned in closer, and I noticed how the afternoon light caught the determination in everyone's eyes. This wasn't just about grades anymore. This was about respect. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Mrs. Kowalczyk announced a major research project worth 30% of our final grade. She distributed the assignment sheets with her usual efficiency, but I noticed something immediately. The topics she'd assigned weren't random. Those of us who'd participated in the name pronunciation protest got the most obscure, difficult subjects. I'd been assigned the role of minor Polish nobility in 17th century trade relations. Siobhan got Irish monastic influence on medieval manuscript illumination. Nguyen's topic involved Vietnamese court ceremonies during the Nguyen dynasty. Mrs. Kowalczyk assigning Polish nobility research to Xiomara feels pretty pointed, doesn't it? Makes me wonder if she picked these topics late at night, carefully matching each difficult student with something from their supposed heritage. Meanwhile, Marcus and others who hadn't challenged her received straightforward topics like causes of the American Revolution or the Industrial Revolution's impact on urban life. The message was clear. She was setting us up to fail. I spent that evening at the public library, searching desperately for sources on Polish nobility. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, noticed my frustration and offered to help. When I explained my topic, she frowned and checked her database. After 20 minutes